Static hissed from the terminal, carrying a casualty projection of 4 billion souls. Beside the glowing monitor sat a cracked ceramic mug, smelling faintly of stale, bitter coffee. Admiral Chen's broadcast cycled through the fleet network. "We can save 3 billion. 400 million will burn." The pause hung heavy across 147 ship channels. "We can leave in 1 week or stay until the end." The votes registered instantly. Not a single vessel chose to break orbit. The archives recorded the survival of 4 billion. They rarely mention what it cost the ones who saved them. 10 days prior, that kind of sacrifice defied calculation. High Arbiter Zelthorn stood at the center of the Concordat auditory chamber. The rigid, chitinous plates of his exoskeleton clattered against the podium. "Stabilization requires energy output equal to 12 industrial sectors," he stated. His mandible translator added a harsh, mechanical reverb. "The cost exceeds the economic value of the Talvin species. Evacuation is denied." Ambassador Prism fractured. A high-pitched, shattering chime echoed from his crystalline shoulders as a hairline crack formed in his chest. 4 billion of his kind had just been mathematically erased. Prism was monitoring deep space channels when the quarantine protocol fractured. It started on Proxima Station. Sector 9 docking manager Jace, wiping dark grease from a heavy canvas jacket, manually overrode the lockdown codes. "Bay doors open," Jace broadcasted over the local frequency. "Clear the lanes." The heavy steel blast doors groaned, echoing through the empty transit halls. Warning klaxons flared yellow across his grease-stained face. He didn't blink. He just jammed a wrench into the manual override relay, locking it open. Prism's surveillance algorithms flagged the anomaly. No Concordat vessel had authorization. A lone merchant hauler, the Wandering Star, burned hard through the exclusionary zone. Captain Rin Voss kept her comms open. The telemetry from Calith splashed across her primary screen in harsh, unforgiving red. "You are violating a restricted sector," a Concordat drone chimed. Rin leaned forward. "I'm not arguing." She tapped the faded ceramic mug on her console. "I'm just explaining why I'm right. Reroute main power to the drives." The Concordat targeting lasers locked onto her hull. The drone initiated a firing sequence. Then, the sensors detected the anomaly. The Wandering Star wasn't a military dreadnought. It was a rusted cargo ship, retrofitted with extra life support scrubbers. Yet, within 48 hours, the human network erupted. They didn't calculate return on investment. Colony ships purged their hydroponics bays to make room for passengers. Luxury liners ripped out their grand halls. 70 vessels altered course toward Calith. The Talvin Star shifted from yellow to a bloated, angry crimson. Surface temperatures on the crystalline homeworld spiked. Prism's people sought shelter in subterranean learning gardens. Their natural luminescence faded as the starlight poisoned them. He monitored the human fleet's progress. At standard speeds, they would arrive 3 days too late. Prism's harmonic resonance deepened. His people were singers of light, artists of solidified music, now reduced to refugees huddling in the dark. The sight of a lesser species hurling themselves into a stellar furnace broke his despair. He bypassed Concordat security protocols. He began feeding Rin Voss restricted planetary defense data, guiding her through the orbital debris fields. Someone had to bend the laws of physics. Dr. Okonkwo's experimental slipstream corridors had a 60% simulated success rate, 0 practical tests. The human flagship Endeavour powered up the prototype drive. The fabric of local space tore open. It reeked of burning ozone, or rather, burning metal. Prism corrected himself. He had never smelled ozone. The Endeavour plunged into the unstable rift. 4 agonizing minutes of dead air followed. Prism tracked the exit coordinates. Nothing, only the cold static of the void. Then a massive distortion rippled near Calith. The Endeavour punched through the vacuum, its port nacelle scorched and venting plasma. It had survived the transit. The transit time dropped from 16 days to 4. The impossible was now merely a logistical nightmare. More ships followed. The Liberty, an aging retrofitted dreadnought, took the corridor next. It didn't exit cleanly. The slipstream spat the colossal vessel out near the gravity well of Calith's outer gas giant. Prism accessed the internal telemetry. The Liberty had taken on 120,000 Talvan refugees during its first planetside run. Overcapacity was an understatement. Life support systems buckled under the strain of sudden oxygen conversion. Alarms screamed through the Liberty's lower decks. Rin Voss, coordinating from her freighter nearby, received the distress hail. The air scrubbers had failed entirely. The atmosphere was thinning rapidly, dropping below critical human survivability thresholds. "Reroute oxygen from the bridge to the refugee holds," the Liberty captain ordered. "We don't leave our people behind. That's not who we are." Prism listened as the human crew willingly starved their own lungs. The Talvan passengers breathed. The humans collapsed at their stations. It was a stark, brutal exchange of life for life, completely devoid of economic rationale. Arbiter Zelthorn's mathematical models shattered under the weight of such irrational sacrifice. The Concordat had always maintained that survival required absolute self-interest. Humanity proved survival required the exact opposite. Prism watched the vital signs flatline across the Liberty's bridge. One by one, the green indicators flipped to black. A young ensign, barely 20, slumped over her navigation console, her fingers still clamped around the thruster controls. She had held the ship steady until her last breath. That specific data point, that single unquantifiable loss, burned itself into Prism's memory matrix. The contagion spread. The Concordat surveillance grid lit up with unauthorized slipstream breaches. A Miatani medical fleet, previously bound by bureaucratic inertia, suddenly mobilized. "Oath of preservation invoked," the translucent commander broadcasted. The Miatani ships were beautiful, fragile things, resembling bioluminescent manta rays gliding through the vacuum. Their pacifist doctrine usually kept them light years away from conflict zones. Now, they flew directly into a kinetic storm, deploying regeneration pods to the human dreadnoughts. Massive Korsath war barges dropped out of hyperspace. Their armored captains demanded the right of personal honor to shield the evacuation vessels from stellar debris. The Varthos collectives didn't even hail the fleet, they simply appeared. Thousands of crystalline entities, shifting from solid form to blinding energy states. They linked together, forming a massive, shimmering web of kinetic force around Calith's equator, trying to hold the expanding photosphere back with their own bodies. Captain Rin Voss paused. She picked up her cracked mug. She took a slow, deliberate sip of cold coffee, the ceramic clinking softly against her teeth. She set it down. "They're actually coming," she whispered. The evacuation accelerated. Millions loaded onto whatever ship could cycle an airlock. But the dying star didn't care about honor or sacrifice. Calith's core destabilized faster than the engineers predicted. The final eruption sequence began. The evacuation window slammed shut. The transmission from the dying sun painted the command deck in harsh, bleeding red. Prism watched the same feed, his crystalline chest now vibrating with a low, harmonic resonance of awe. "We can save 3 billion, 400 million will burn," the broadcast echoed. Admiral Chen's voice carried the exhaustion of 100 lifetimes. "We can leave in 1 week or stay until the end." 147 ships, a massive armada of human, Miatani and Korsath vessels holding position in the lethal radiation zone. If they stayed to load the remaining 400 million Talvan, the star would swallow them all. Leaving now meant survival for the vast majority, a purely mathematical victory. Arbiter Zelthorn, watching from the safety of the Concordat core, anticipated the retreat. His mandibles clicked in rapid, rhythmic succession. The pheromone signature in his chamber shifted to a sour acid tang. He knew the math demanded retreat. The votes registered. Not a single vessel chose to break orbit. Not one engine flared for retreat. They held the line. The human dreadnoughts locked their magnetic tethers to the planetary crust, acting as massive thermal shields. Varthos energy manipulators merged their forms with the ship deflectors, buying agonizing seconds against the solar expansion. They would burn together. A faint, deep space ping registered on the outer sensory buoys, an unregistered signal cutting through the solar interference. A century of silence had long since smoothed the sharp edges of Calith destruction. The survivors built new Calith around a stable white dwarf, far from the jurisdiction of the old Concordat. The Caith principle was enshrined in galactic law, carved into the stone of 100 worlds. At the center of Memorial Plaza, beneath an archway of braided steel and crystal, sat a sealed glass display. Inside rested a cracked ceramic mug. The faded letters were barely legible now. The bitter scent of coffee was long gone, replaced by the sterile, perfectly temperature-controlled air of a museum. A young human girl named Rin pressed her hands against the glass. The amber light of the artificial sun caught the fractured glaze of the handle. Above her, the plaza hummed with the foot traffic of a dozen different species. Their voices blended into a continuous, unbroken harmonic resonance. Deep in the sector observation post, an automated distress beacon tripped on the primary console. A red light pulsed against the polished metal. An operator reached for the comms panel, fingers moving without hesitation, locking the coordinates. The broad thrusters of a heavy rescue cruiser ignited in the atmosphere above the plaza, casting a long, sweeping shadow across the display case. The ceramic mug vibrated slightly against the glass.